ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
It's 6 o'clock. Welcome to Dewbs & Co. with me, Emily Carver, tonight. Now, a prolific internet catfish killer who preyed on young girls has now been sentenced to a life term with a minimum of 20 years. But should life really mean life? And the biggest political story of the day has got to be Keir Starmer tying himself in knots over how on earth he defines working people. It now sounds like anyone with savings, assets, or God forbid, a rental property is ripe for the picking. Is Middle Britain under attack? And we've been up in County Durham all day, and one thing keeps coming up at the doorstep: the axing of winter fuel payments. With billions being spent elsewhere, does this Labour government have its priorities right? And in other news, the number of illegal migrants crossing the English Channel has now surpassed the total for the whole of last year. Is this a sign that Labour's plans aren't working? And what deterrent do we really have? And as King Charles and Keir Starmer dance around the issue of slavery payments, is it time for Britain just to stop apologising for the past? OK, well, that's all to come in the next hour, so do stick with us. I've got a fantastic panel. I'll reveal who in just a moment. But first, let's get the latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Emily, thank you very much, and good evening to you. 2 minutes past 6, and as we heard at the top of the programme, one of the world's most prolific online child abusers has been sentenced to life today in prison with a minimum of 20 years. Alexander McCartney admitted to 185 charges involving 70 children, and that included the manslaughter of a 12-year-old girl from the United States. Kamaran Thomas took her own life rather than obey McCartney's demand to involve her younger sister in the abuse. Police believe, though, the total number of children he abused is about 3,500. Well, Catherine Kieran's from Northern Ireland's Serious Crime Unit spoke earlier and said thousands of children and their families have been left dealing with the traumatic aftermath.
Their courage stands in stark contrast to McCartney's cowardice in targeting vulnerable young girls. The bravery of the young victims has been an inspiration to everyone who worked on this case. His conviction sends a message to other abusers. Your actions have dire consequences, and there is nowhere to hide from the justice system.
The number of migrants crossing the Channel into the UK so far this year has already surpassed the entire total for 2023. Today's milestone, confirmed by GB News, was reached when the Border Force vessel Typhoon arrived in Dover with 55 migrants on board, bringing this year's total to 29,451. That is just over the 29,437 recorded last year. Over 1,200 migrants have arrived this week alone, with calmer weather allowing a sharp rise in crossings. Officials are now predicting up to 40,000 migrants could cross by the end of the year. And that's despite Labour's pledge to tackle the crisis and, as they say, smash the gangs. A Home Office spokesperson called the latest migrant deaths a devastating tragedy as people smuggling operations continue to escalate. Tommy Robinson will miss his own planned march tomorrow for thousands of protesters after being arrested by Kent police. The 41-year-old, known as Stephen Yaxley Lennon, is accused of contempt of court related to a film he aired at a previous protest in London, making alleged libelous claims against a Syrian refugee. It comes as he's facing additional charges under the Terrorism Act for allegedly failing to provide his mobile phone PIN to police. Well, as supporters prepare to demonstrate tomorrow, significant police presence is expected to, the Met Police say, ensure safety amid expected counter-protests. Teenager Brianna Jai's school and local authority could not have foreseen her murder, a coroner has ruled today. The inquest found there was no reason to suspect that Brianna's friendship with one of her murderers was anything but genuine. The 16-year-old was tragically stabbed 28 times in an attack after being lured to a park in Warrington in 2023. Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, both 15 at the time, were sentenced to life imprisonment in February for their roles in Brianna's murder. Cheshire's senior coroner, Jacqueline Devonish, concluded the inquest, saying Brianna was unlawfully killed and there were no signs that her friendship with Jenkinson posed a risk. And, excuse me, Sir Chris Hoy says that he is utterly blown away by the support he has received since announcing he has terminal cancer. In his first message since sharing that news of his prostate cancer, now in stage 4, the 6-time Olympic cycling champion said he is so grateful to everyone for their incredible kindness and for their support. Sir Chris also added he's going to write it all in a new book, saying it's helping him to process the news. Take a listen.
So grateful to everyone for their incredible kindness and support. You may have heard by now that I'm ready to share that my cancer is stage 4. I will be living with it for the rest of my life. Now, it's not the news anyone imagines hearing, and it obviously came as a huge shock. We've taken time to process it as a family, and I now have a deep resolve to turn this incredibly difficult diagnosis into something more positive that can help not just me, but anyone, anywhere living with stage 4.
Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you for a full roundup at 7 o'clock. Now, though, it's back to Emily.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
OK, welcome along to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver, this evening. And joining me until 7 o'clock is my panel, Conservative Life peer, Lord Daniel Moylan, thank you very much, and former Labour Minister Steve McCabe, thank you to you as well. Now, I want all of your views this evening. Please do get in touch, gbnews.com/your say. As Michelle Dewberry says every night of the week, it is about you as much as it is about my esteemed panel and myself, of course. Now, as we heard just there in the bulletins, this is a pretty shocking story to read the details of. A man from Northern Ireland has been given a life sentence with a minimum of 20 years in jail for extreme online sexual abuse of children and also the manslaughter of a 12-year-old girl. Now, this man, Alexander McCartney, just 26 years old, from County Armagh, he admitted to 185 charges, including more than 50 blackmail offences. He is now one of the world's most prolific online child abusers. Now, what he seemed to do, he seemed to create fake personas, essentially catfish young girls to target as many as 3,500 victims aged just 10 to 16 from more than 30 countries. He was working across the world, blackmailing young children into sending explicit pictures and doing all sorts. A really, really horrible story. I mean, when you hear about these types of cases, Daniel, I mean, obviously shocking to read that a man aged in his 20s would commit such horrific crimes. But people start to think about, he was doing this through Snapchat, social media, pretending to be their friend, pretending to be, you know, a young girl to try and get these young girls to send him these pictures and all sorts. And then we find out a young girl committed suicide as a result. Do we talk about social media regulation? Do we talk about tougher sentences? Should life mean life in these kind of sick and twisted cases?
I think the first thing I'd want to say is I don't know anything about his circumstances, but there is I believe, a whole sort of class of young men who live their lives entirely on the internet, cut off from the real world. They're locked up more or less they lock themselves up more or less 24 hours a day in spending their time on the internet. I'm not saying there aren't perhaps women who do it as well, but it's the young men we're thinking about at the moment. And of course, if you do that, you lose all touch with any sense of right and wrong, because to some extent, right and wrong depends on social context and the response of your own conscience to other people. So if you live entirely in that world, you are potentially a very dangerous person already. The second thing is, you say it's shocking, and of course it is shocking, but we should be careful of saying this is a case that is unique. I mean, every case is unique. But I mean, I think there are quite a lot of people out there who are behaving like this and trying to do this sort of thing. It's more common perhaps than we think. In this case, it all blew up in his face very badly because one of the abused children committed suicide because she was in America and had access to a gun, and she committed suicide. So that brought the whole thing. You know, how could he escape that? They were coming for him after that. But I think this locking yourself away in a world of social media is a recipe for losing any sense of right and wrong.
I think you're absolutely right, and I don't know all the details of this case, but it may well be that he was involved in chat rooms where there were other men of his age talking about similar things. He might have been, you know, egging others on, or other people egging him on. I think that's a good point that Daniel makes about living your life completely online. It's like that incel culture as well that people talk about. That is actually very real. And what do you make of it?
Well, I agree with Daniel. It's it's an alternate reality, and therefore they lose all touch with the real world. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was in chat rooms and sharing things. I suppose the thing that really strikes me is the scale of it and the length of time it went on is enormous, and it does suggest that there has to be a better policing model and a better supervision model. You shouldn't be allowed to do that for that length of time on that scale. That is the thing that strikes me. And
he was using 64 different devices, pretending to be a young girl to lure his victims into sending intimate pictures and things like that, and then blackmailing them off the back of it. I mean, and apparently, according to the judge, showed little remorse, if any. No remorse at all. I mean, you know, can people just be completely amoral?
Well, I think in his case,
that's a big question.
It looks as if he was.
Well, yeah. Well, we'll move on to other matters as well. I just thought. OK, right, well, coming up, we're going to be talking about whether Labour, or Keir Starmer specifically, and I guess the rest of his cabinet, know what a working person is. It's all got rather confusing. We'll debate that in 2 secs.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, let's speak now to Sales Director at Savills for Quinta Properties, Raquel Santos, who is live for us in Portugal. Raquel, good to see you this morning. Why are all these celebrities flocking to Portugal all of a sudden?
Yeah, I guess it's just because of basically the great lifestyle that we have, security, you know. Portugal has kind of been a hidden, tucked away gem for quite a while that people didn't realize existed. And with the international flights with the American flights coming in, it's kind of been put back on the map as a country that's worth visiting and worth investing in due to the secure investments that we offer in real estate.
Raquel, is it anything to do with tax rates? Because I think capital gains tax is, I think if it's over a certain amount, you pay half of your rate, which is 28%. Capital gains on shares and cryptocurrencies is 0. Is it anything to do with that? Because over here in the UK, big storm at the moment about millionaires apparently leaving in exodus because of the mooted increases in taxes in just a few weeks.
Yes, so obviously the alterations that are happening with the UK in terms of the tax that's being implemented on the capital gains, as you mentioned, we've definitely noticed has become a big drive, mostly on the vendor side as well, who are looking to sell because they don't want to be hit, with these higher capital gains, which is close to coming into effect.
Raquel, have you noticed then millionaires, high net worth people from the UK getting in touch with you looking to relocate?
Definitely. It's for multiple reasons, obviously, the changes that are due to come into place, obviously, and Portugal just seems to be a safe option always. When things do kind of change, people opt to come into Portugal because we're quite steady, we're quite stable.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave. I'm so surprised. I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver, tonight. And with me until 7 is Conservative Life peer Lord Daniel Moylan and the former Labour Minister, Steve McCabe. Thank you very much indeed. Lots of you getting in touch about that horrific case of this catfish killer, online sexual predator of young girls. A few of you getting in touch to say, you know, life imprisonment isn't even enough. You want to bring back the death sentence for things like this. I'm not sure about that. But certainly life should mean life in the case of this horrific crime. Anyway, in my opinion. Anyway, in other news, the Prime Minister is under fire for not quite being able to define who working people are ahead of next week's budget. So do Labour actually know who working people are? Let's take a deep dive, see what they've had to say.
What is a working person? Well, a working person... Simon Cowell? Well, a working person is someone who works their living...
I've got that.
And uses our public services... The person I have in mind,
Simon Cowell.
The person I have in my mind, Nick, when I say working people, is people who earn their living, rely on our services, and don't really have the ability to write a cheque when they get into trouble. So, the sort of people I'm meeting pretty well every day now.
Prime Minister, are you a working person?
Well, I would define a working person as somebody who goes out and earns their living, usually paid in a sort of monthly cheque. But I think that's obviously very broad, so let me be clear. What I mean, or if you like, who I have in my mind's eye when I make decisions as Prime Minister, are the sorts of working people who go out, work hard, and maybe save a bit of money, but don't have the wherewithal to write a cheque to get out of difficulties if they and their family get into difficulties.
There are 5 million small business owners in this country. Are they working people?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know how the shadow deputy...
Little bit of a word salad there, Steve. I mean, in terms of what he means by working people. I mean, he was talking earlier about how it's all about his mind's eye, and he pictures a working person as someone who has a knot in their stomach when, if push comes to shove and something happens to their family, they can't just get a chequebook out, but they might have a little bit of savings. What do you make of it all, Steve?
Well, it's maybe not the best term, but it's not anything that new. I mean, I can remember Theresa May talking about jams. That was just about managing.
But that makes sense, Steve.
And there was trouble defining who the jams were, and then Ed Miliband had the squeezed middle. I mean, this comes up with regularity. We know the group of people that they're talking about. They're talking about people who work fairly hard, who earn a modest living, who don't have additional resources, and when things are tight or something goes wrong, don't have an extra supply of savings to fall back on. That is broadly the group that Theresa May was trying to define, that Ed Miliband was talking about, and that the Prime Minister is trying to speak about now.
But calling them, it's different to say, you know, the just about managing or the squeezed middle. saying working people. It's a bit of an insult to people who don't fall within his definition of working people. Most people consider themselves to be working people, even, God forbid, landlords. Daniel.
Well, it's not about simply about definitions. It's harder than that. It's really hard. It's about tax this month. It's about who's going to be paying extra tax, because the government has said they're not going to put up taxes on working people. So it really matters who working people are. This is not just trying to appeal to a certain section of society and show that you identify them with them and understand their troubles, as perhaps Lady May was doing when she was Prime Minister. This is saying, if you are a working person, you will not be paying extra tax, but if you're not a working person, you probably will, unless, of course, you're at the other end of the spectrum and you're out of work altogether. He doesn't have much time for those people either, it would appear, but obviously they're not expecting to pay more tax. But anybody who doesn't fit into his category of working people can expect to pay more tax starting next week, and so it really matters what he means by working people. And he can't define it, he can't express it. But basically what he seems to be saying is that if you are somebody who has worked hard all your life, and in the course of that you have saved money, you have made provision for the future, you have put money aside so that if there is a crisis, because you know crises happen in your life, you might be able to write a cheque for it. You might be able to do that. Then you are in scope of higher taxes. That's what this actually means. And people, it's so. The other thing is politically, it's so utterly tin-eared. Yeah. Why does he want to be the most divisive prime minister? He's already shown he can't stand pensioners and taken their winter fuel allowance away from them. Why does he want to be the most divisive prime minister in history? It is very divisive
because Daniel's quite right, isn't he? That when you're talking about, you know, the just about managing or the squeezed middle, that's quite vague and indicates, you know, vaguely who you want to help and prioritise. And what direction you want to go in.
Of people, the governments of the day
This is coming down to, as Daniel says, who they're going to tax more, who is going to bear the brunt of this upcoming budget. And you could take two people, right, who have been on exactly the same salary in their working life. One has decided to squander their money. The other has decided, I don't know, to put things in an ISA, to invest in some stocks and shares, to invest in property, or to, you know, be a land. I don't know what, but one is a working person and one isn't.
And the working
person, you know, it is divisive.
I'm not aware of any tax. I'm not aware of any tax that would directly have a massive impact on the sort of person you've just described. Sure, if someone is making a lot of money through profits generated from property sales, that might well fall within corporation tax. But anyone who's worked hard and put a bit away for a rainy day is not going to be caught. You tell me the tax that's going to catch that person.
Well, they already pay income tax, and they'd be paying higher income tax on that. That's the first thing. Those who have put their money into ISAs are allowed to keep that tax-free. For how long will that continue? You could find there's something... You know, this is where she's reduced to playing about. People who have had shares, and some share... The only shares I've got directly in my name are the privatisation shares that my father passed on to me. So some of them have gone up. If I sold those, I have to pay capital gains tax. If I pay... and it could be... You could put a higher capital gains tax on that. Thousands of people have got the shares that they were encouraged to buy as part of privatisations and so on. All these people they're hard-working. They are hard-working people who are striving to save. You're killing the instinct to save and look after yourself. That's what Keir Starmer is doing. That's Labour policy.
I think it's true that, you know, government should want people to do the right thing, i.e. invest in their future, put money away, maybe invest in assets. It's sensible things to do to prepare themselves for the future. It does feel like Sir Keir Starmer is trying to, you know, draw this horrible divide between what he perceives to be the haves and the have-nots.
No, I think he's trying to identify a group of
but why
people
doesn't he just talk
where
about taxing the super wealthy and the super rich? He's not. He's talking about anyone who can write a
he's
cheque.
trying to identify a group of people who need to be protected from tax rises. That's what he's trying to do. We've had it for months, and we're going to have a few days more of speculation about the budget. But you must admit, there isn't a group available that Daniel and co haven't tried to say are going to be hit by this budget. The only thing they won't admit to is the fact that the budget is going to have to increase tax because of the mess they left behind.
Yeah, but then I'm thinking, OK, we were told about this £22 billion financial black hole, and this is why we're going to have to raise taxes, and this is why, you know, the purse strings are going to have to be tightened and all of this. But then we also hear that Rachel Reeves is ready to start doing a bit of creative accounting, perhaps, or stretch the rules, change the rules, so she can borrow $50 billion to spend on things that she thinks should be prioritised. It's all rather confusing, Daniel.
Oh, I don't want to talk about the $22 billion tax hole. I don't think anyone believes it.
But what about the $50 billion?
I don't think anyone believes it anymore, and it's already a $40 billion tax hole, and it goes to whatever a black hole, and it goes to whatever number she wants to think about. I want to come back to this point. We're not just inventing who's going to have to pay more tax. Labour is a high tax party. We've always said that. They've never put up taxes in the past.
Are at their highest
they are
since
at
the
their
Second
highest.
World War.
They are at their highest. They are at their highest, and the Conservatives have nothing to boast about in that regard. But that was not done because they were instinctively in support of higher taxes. It was because of the amount of money we blew on the pandemic. The Labour Party actually relishes putting taxes up, and the difficulty is it doesn't want to hit working people, so it hits people with savings. But then you've got this contrast, Emily. We undersave in this country. We should have a tax system that encourages saving, not that penalises it. Because we undersave in this country, Keir Starmer has to go off crawling on his knees to international investors at a global summit he calls together to beg them to invest in Britain. He's begging them to invest in Britain because we don't save enough in this country to generate that investment ourselves.
Are you a bit worried about,
scandalous.
Steve, are you a bit worried about how long this has been drawn out and consumer confidence down? We've seen the latest figures on business closures, people, you know, selling up because they're worried they're going to be hit with various taxes, capital gains, whatever it is. And worried about that? You know, talk of millionaires leaving. I mean, that reduces the tax pool.
I mean, I've heard it all before.
But it's happening, isn't it?
I will be glad when the budget comes and then we can have a sensible, rational conversation about what the impact is going to be. And there will be winners and losers because there is in every budget. Do I think it's gone on too long? Yes, I do. And I think there maybe was a tactical error in allowing this to run for so long.
Not just tactical. I think it's actually done some damage. But anyway, let us know your thoughts. I mean, Eve says the Tories left such a mess for Starmer. He's simply trying to do his best. There you go. There's a generous view. Alan says, working people who get paid by cheque. Cheque. Who gets paid by or writes cheques these days? Starmer's completely out of date and touch, yeah. I'm not sure if Keir Starmer writes any cheques either, to be honest. Anyway, coming up with, he gets cheques written for him. With pensioners predicted to freeze to death in Britain this winter, should Labour go back on winter fuel payment cuts in the budget? We've been in County Durham all day today to see what people are thinking on the ground.
Evening. Thanks for joining me for your latest weather update from the Met Office. Here on GB News, 3 areas of weather tomorrow. A fine day for many, but there will be some wet weather in the far northwest and quite grey and a little damp in the far southeast. The bigger picture shows an area of low pressure down to the southwest. That is just edging away. This weather front is moving north, bringing some damp conditions through this evening across central and southern Scotland, clearing away from northeast England. At the same time, overnight, some patchy rain just trickling up from France towards Kent and maybe even into the London area. But most places dry and clear through the nights. Temperatures could dip down to single figures, but generally pretty mild for the end of October. into tomorrow, and as I said, for many of us, it's a fine day, but there will be a weather front bringing cloud and rain into the Outer Hebrides and across the Northern Isles, and that will only slowly track its way southwards across parts of the mainland down towards the Highlands. But for much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, it's a dry start to the weekend. Could be some fog around, and further south, maybe a little misty in places. Certainly a grey start for East Anglia and the southeast. A little bit of rain and drizzle likely here. Staying quite damp actually across parts of the southeast for most of the day. Quite windy in the far southwest, but not as windy as today. But for the Isles of Scilly and Cornwall, still a noticeable breeze. Could be the odd shower, but much of southwest England, Wales, northern England, eastern Scotland, dry and fine. That weather front will bring cloud and rain to the west coast of Scotland and much of Northern Ireland by the afternoon. But in the sunny spells, feeling pretty pleasant, 15 or 16 degrees Celsius. By Sunday, all that wet weather's pretty much out of the way. It makes for a cold start to Sunday, but generally a good-looking day across the bulk of England and Wales. Plenty of sunshine. Scotland, Northern Ireland, mostly starting dry, but more rain coming in from the northwest as the day goes on. Temperature's not as high, and after that chilly start, we'll probably get up to 12, 13, maybe 14 degrees Celsius. Goodbye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Major problems in Northumberland near to the Scottish border to the west of Alnwick. The A697 remains shut between the Newmore Crossroads and Frunton after a lorry overturned and left a large spillage of chemicals all over the carriageway at around 5 o'clock this morning. On Merseyside, the A580, the East Lancashire Road, remains shut through St Helens for a police investigation at the Windle traffic lights. The M11 is partly blocked heading south of Cambridge from junction 10 to 9 because of an obstruction. One to bear in mind if you're heading into Essex towards Stansted. And in Oxford, the eastern bypass is blocked eastbound near the Hayford Hill roundabout by an obstruction causing long queues back onto the A34. The Kent stretch of the M25 slow clockwise after an earlier crash near Dartford, and the M5 in Somerset down to a single lane southbound junction 22 to 23 towards Bridgewater. They're recovering a lorry that caught fire. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
OK, welcome back. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver, this evening. And with me is the Conservative Life peer, Lord Daniel Moylan, and the former Labour Minister, Steve McCabe. Thank you very much indeed. Well, yes, Labour is now being urged to rule out this winter fuel payment cut. That does not look like it's going to happen. This is all coming up in next week's upcoming budget. But the move could see millions of pensioners impacted this winter. Labour say tough decisions had to be made on the economy.
Made the choice to means test the winter fuel payment so that it is only targeted at those most in need. I know that not everyone in this hall or in the country will agree with every decision that I make. But I will not duck those decisions. Not for political expediency, not for personal advantage. I judged it the right decision in the circumstances that we inherited. I did not take those decisions lightly. I will never take the responsibilities of this office lightly.
OK, well, GB News presenter Patrick Christys has been speaking to locals up in County Durham.
How do you feel about it? What's the word on the street?
I think it's absolutely disgusting. These people have paid into the system all their lives to be basically messed around at this time of their life when they really need it.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's absolutely shocking and disgraceful the way the government's treating the old people, mind. Absolutely disgraceful.
There'd be old pensioners sitting there, wrapped up, blankets on, no heating on, house damp because they couldn't put the heating on, and it's just a crying shame.
Well, there you go. There's Patrick interviewing a couple of people up in County Durham, and that's in Stanley. Now, that's historically a very Labour socialist area. I think some of the roads that Patrick was interviewing people on were called things like Marks Crescent, Lenin Close, Keir Hardie Street, and those types of things.
Were there any of them called Keir Starmer Avenue?
Not Keir Starmer Avenue, no. Not yet. But it doesn't sound like there will be a Keir Starmer Avenue anytime soon up there, to be honest, Steve. People are really... A lot of people saying it seems like the government cares more about the world than it does about, you know, us here. I mean, can you see why people are sort of thinking that way?
Well, I mean, I think if you take any benefit away from people, it's never going to be popular.
No.
And I can't really see that Labour aren't going to suffer some damage from this. And I suspect that the first reports of an elderly person dying of cold this winter, which will happen, it happens every year, will mean that the government will be hounded, and understandably so. My own view is the Labour Party and the Labour MPs have missed a trick over this. The winter fuel allowance is taxpayers' money. What they should be doing is going after the energy supply companies and the standing charge that they impose on pensioners, which is actually unearned profit for simply putting a meter in someone's home. So, you know, if we want to look after pensioners, there is a source of money to support them. It's broadly the same for the standing charge for electricity as it is for the winter fuel allowance. That's what they should do, and that's a way of compensating the pensioners without imposing another burden on the taxpayer.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel, cheaper energy would obviously be preferable to subsidising energy bills, of course. Now, we're promised by the Labour government that this GB Energy in Aberdeenshire will save us all hundreds of pounds on our bills.
Well, that's a load.
Is that going to happen?
No, that's a complete load of nonsense. And it's the case already that the price of energy, the price of electricity, is actually controlled by the government. So the idea that you can cut it by £500 a year, if that's the standing charge, for the whole population, and you've got cheaper energy. We've already got the cheapest energy the government will allow us to have because it's capped. We've got a price cap. Has nobody noticed that? It was introduced by Mrs May. We still have a price cap. It's adjusted every 6 months. So if the standing charge is cut, then the consumption rate, the rate on consumption will have to go up because that's what regulated prices mean. There isn't any free money. I think what's really interesting and what they'll never recover from is the fact that instead of preparing the ground for this, they came into office and announced it almost with relish, practically on day one. Now, you might have said they had to do it in order to prepare people for the year, but they could have postponed it a year, they could have finessed it, they could have... But the first thing they do is they attack pensioners, and not... You know, the whole pensioner class is simply attacked by them as if it was a really good piece of fun. What a dreadful start to a government.
It came as a massive surprise to people.
And they'd never warned of it.
No.
They come into office and they say that. They try to blame it on the Tories and the black hole. Nobody believes them. It's their political choice. They will never recover from it. They lost the next election that day because people will not have forgotten it.
But Steve, just lastly on this, now, I imagine a lot of metropolitan left-wingers would scoff at this, but a few people who Patrick interviewed today up in County Durham, you know, they have been saying things like, we see so much money spent on people who've just arrived, you know, via the channel. They get housing, they get 3 square meals a day, they have heated bedrooms, you know, all of this. And then they compare that directly to the fact that pensioners who've lived in this country all their lives, mostly, are having this benefit taken away. I mean, it's an obvious comparison, isn't it, really, for a lot of people?
Well, I have no doubt that there are people who are going to lose the winter fuel allowance who will actually be much worse off as a result. I have no doubt about that, and I think it is a difficulty for the government. There are also lots of people, and we all know them, who tell you that the winter fuel allowance was an extra nest egg for them, and they didn't.
Like the free bus pass and things like that. You know,
I mean,
they don't need
there are people who will tell you that. But you know, as I say, and I don't accept, actually, Daniel's point, the standing charge is an additional charge that the supply companies are imposing on people simply for being consumers. And it is not right that they should be making that profit while pensioners aren't able to use their heating.
I mean, fundamentally, we need to produce more energy, don't we?
It is not a profit.
It is exactly a profit.
I don't want to go into this, but it's always been the case that the electricity companies were allowed to charge a certain amount for the costs of the equipment
Yes, for
not
putting a
just the
meter in your
not
home.
just the meter,
Yes.
the whole equipment that is
What
required.
equipment?
Do you think electricity is made by the fairies and just pumped into your home? Are you not aware of the huge amount of equipment that comes at the back of it, on the one hand, and then charged
Yes,
for
Steve,
usage
are the fairies
on
making
top of
the,
that?
Well, apparently, I think the fairies are making policy on my right-hand side here.
And nothing to do with the electricity standing charge. The fact is,
I think you'll find there's quite a lot of evidence to show that what you're saying is not accurate.
You could have said this benefit is subject to tax in future. The people for whom it's a nest egg, they will then therefore pay something back, 20%, 40%, whatever it is, according to their rate.
Then that would have been another tax for you to complain about.
Most people just want cheaper energy.
We would have complained.
And successive...
We would have complained, but it wouldn't have made
Daniel,
much difference.
successive governments have made it more and more difficult for us to produce cheap energy, and that's what we need. We just need cheaper production of energy.
We know how to have cheap energy, but we don't produce it. We get more expensive energy.
Now, we're going to move on, Daniel, because I do want to move on to our next story, because this broke today, and GB News can exclusively reveal that the number of channel migrants arriving in the UK this year has overtaken the total for the whole of 2023. Now, it is only the 25th of October, and we've already surpassed the number from the entirety of last year. Labour came into power saying that they would be the ones to smash the gangs. Rwanda was never going to work. It was neither ethical nor cost-efficient nor practical. OK, fine, but how's smashing the gangs going, Steve?
Well, look, this is going to get worse before it gets better. And right at this moment, obviously, the gangs are trying to maximise the number of people they can get across the channel before the winter sets in. So it is going to get worse. If I was part of the government at the moment, I think I'd be wanting to tell a better story about what's happening in terms of work to address the gangs. I think we need to know more about the operations that are taking place. I don't know why we're not taking news crews out on disruption exercises so that people can see what they're talking about, because I think the government does have to explain exactly what they're trying to do. And I think they also have to tell a much better story about the kind of cooperation that's going to be required, both from the countries who are experiencing this as much as ourselves and the countries that are allowing fake refugees to turn up on our shores. I think we're going to have to look much harder at what we can do with those people. But broadly, we're going to have to tell people what's happening and show them what's happening, because this is going to get worse.
But Steve, you sound like, you know, it's a good thing if the government gets tough on this. I worry that the current Labour administration are very, very squeamish about this issue. We rarely ever hear from Keir Starmer about this issue, and for a lot of people in this country, it is one of the top three, if not the top issue for them, that we don't appear to have, you know, managed borders at all. And the cost of this is spiralling out of control, and also the threat to security, threat to safety, all of these things. And Keir Starmer does not seem to want to talk about it at all.
Number one, Steve, most comms people will tell you, I think, you cannot tell a good story until you've got the results. And the results are getting worse, not better, because people will laugh at you. They'll say you're doing all those things, but it's still not having an effect. That's the government's comms problem. They haven't got a story to tell that people won't laugh at the moment. Maybe that'll change, but there's no sign of it. Second, nobody believes that this is a priority for Keir Starmer or for Yvette Cooper. They don't believe it's a priority. They don't talk about it. They don't show any political welly for it at all. They run away from the subject as fast as they can. They've got no answers. So people don't believe they're serious. They did sort of believe that Rishi Sunak was serious about it because of the political effort he put into Rwanda, whether you believe that would work or not. But they don't believe these people are serious. They don't think they mean it. In fact, if anything, they think they probably welcome migration because they ideologically they have a lot of supporters. I'm not saying this is necessarily true of Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper, but many of their supporters actually genuinely believe in a borderless world.
They do.
The third thing is the smartest thing Keir Starmer could have done, instead of punishing the pensioners on day one, if on day one he'd come in and said, I've got 6 planes in the air to Rwanda, full, leaving tomorrow, even if he hadn't done any more, the deterrent effect of that and showing how serious he was about it would have transformed his image on this issue.
Well, only if you accept that the Rwanda scheme had that effect. The evidence is that it cost a small fortune and all they managed to send was 4 volunteers.
You know it hadn't actually happened yet, though.
Nobody...
No, all that money was spent and not a single one was sent.
We have no evidence. The moment you had people flying out of this country to be processed, to have their applications processed in Rwanda.
So why didn't the government do it? They knew when they were calling the election. Why didn't they do it?
Absolutely.
Why didn't they do it? Because they knew they couldn't.
Well,
sorry, why didn't the guy... Sorry,
do you think Labour were too quick to just completely write off the Rwanda scheme without having anything in its place?
Well, I genuinely believe that was a waste of money.
You've got Italy using Albania. You've got other countries talking to Rwanda.
Well, they're not using Albania.
You've got European countries thinking, you know, we need these type of third country agreements because otherwise we're just not going to be able to deal with this issue. I mean, Keir Starmer just tried to make political capital of saying that Rwanda is this awful, unethical scheme wasting loads of money, but it actually hadn't been allowed to work, had it?
But if there's going to be some scope for a kind of third country agreement, we'd be much better to do that in collaboration with other countries that are experiencing the same problem. That would be a much better way to do it and to avoid the problems.
I'm sorry, this is nonsense. Even inside inside the European Union, where they have as we know, very strong mechanisms for collaboration and cooperation between member states. Every country is going off doing its own thing because they cannot get agreement on what to do. So the idea that we should sit here and wait for every country to agree and collaborate with us, this is all just fantasy. We need to get on and do our own thing.
And the idea we should repeat a Rwanda scheme that had been tried previously by other governments and failed and was costing a fortune without sending anyone makes no sense whatsoever.
So your solution is that we should be sending television cameras off to watch people ineffectively doing disruption activities somewhere on the continent.
Well, how do you know it's...
because the numbers are still rising.
We'll never know if the Rwanda scheme would have worked because it's obviously been ditched, and I don't believe... I don't know if any other government would bring it in.
Someone else
Anyway, coming up, with all this talk about reparations, and slavery reparations, and talk about how bad our historical past was, etc., is it time to just sort of stop apologising for our history? And also, I think we might talk about the excessive cost of fish and chips, seeing as it's a Friday.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
My kingdom for a voice. Scientists have, I can't believe this story, scientists have incredibly recreated the voice of Richard III using both his skull shape and a knowledge of medieval speech patterns. Me neither. The result is that the king, who was famously killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, would have spoken in English close to that of a man from modern-day Yorkshire or Somerset. Let's take a listen.
The sun shines with no less licht and splendour, nor does it suffer any diminution of its strength.
Let's discuss this further with Yvonne Morley-Chisholm, the voice coach behind the project, who spent 10 years researching how the monarch would have sounded. Yvonne, you can probably see from my face, I have no idea how this works. Can you enlighten me as to what all this is about?
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Dawn. So I had a mad idea 10 years ago. I normally work with actors where we have a recording of a historical person, and we do something called vocal profiling to train the actor who's going to be performing on stage or screen to move their tongue tip, their jaw, their lips, everything, and get behind the personality of who they're playing. We obviously have quite a lot of that missing from Richard. We don't have a recording of him, but I wondered how far we could go. And a key player in this has been and is Professor Caroline Wilkinson, who over a decade ago created his face, first of all, from his skull. Now, on on the day we, as Shakespeare would say, shuffle off our mortal coil, every little dent and dimple in the bones says how fit and strong the muscles were. So I thought, OK, we know what his face could do.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about.
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Budget Day on GB News on Wednesday. Stay with us all day for the most anxiously anticipated budget in a generation.
Morning through to evening, we'll be here with insight and analysis, crunching the numbers
as we work out the cost to the country and, most importantly, to you.
Because the Chancellor has a bill to pay. The question is...
Who's going to pay it? Budget Day all day Wednesday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. Now, there's been so much talk of slavery reparations, and King Charles, he addressed the Commonwealth heads of government in Samoa, and he didn't talk about reparations, but he did address Britain's past. Let's have a listen.
Our cohesion requires that we acknowledge where we have come from. I understand from listening to people across the Commonwealth how the most painful aspects of our past continue to resonate. It is vital, therefore, that we understand our history to guide us to make the right choices in the future.
Gosh, well, there we go, King Charles. And this, of course, comes as Keir Starmer continues to insist reparations are absolutely not on the table at the Commonwealth Summit. Downing Street has also now been forced to rule out the prospect of non-cash reparations, so sort of indirect reparations, things like writing off debt or helping with infrastructure or educational projects and the like. But I don't want to talk specifically necessarily about the reparations question anymore, because we've talked about it so much. I want to ask, should Britain stop apologising for its past on the international stage? Daniel, is it serving us?
I don't think we have anything to apologise for. So I don't
yes.
I don't think we should have started, let alone stopped. We've got very little in our past to apologise for and a great deal to be proud of in what we achieved. And I think we should be reinforcing that in schools and amongst young people. And I think many of them understand that in some respects, because they understand our role in the Second World War and in the first half of the 20th century in saving the world from fascist domination. Slavery was an awful thing, but the idea that Britain was the predominant driver of it, when in fact the slaves were all captured, in West African states, should they be paying reparations? Not going into reparations. And Britain was the power that put an end to the slave trade. I think a lot of people do understand this, and it's just silliness to go around apologising for it. I understand we actually started apologising for it when Prince Albert was alive, Queen Victoria's husband, and he issued an apology for it at some stage as well. So, the slave trade was a very bad thing. We recognised that eventually, and we put an end to it.
The average person on the street isn't responsible for any of these wrongs that people talk about, yet we constantly see our leaders self-flagellate on the international stage. And I wonder, what purpose does it actually serve? Is it good for a nation to feel like... to self-flagellate and constantly talk about wrongs that have not been committed by anyone who's alive today?
No, I think it's a huge, pointless guilt trip, if I'm honest. I mean, I thought the King was actually quite dignified and tactful and diplomatic there, as you would expect, and he put it in the right perspective. Yes, there are things in the past that we have to accept didn't work out as we would view them now, But there's no point in dwelling in that. This is about how we look forward. I mean, I have to say, my own view is I think the Commonwealth is a pretty unwieldy group, and I wouldn't pay too much attention to what's happening there. And if it hadn't been for the efforts of the late Queen, it probably still wouldn't be around at the moment. So, I mean, I think they are going overboard in something that most people in this country wouldn't pay any attention
Difficult,
to.
To be fair,
Steve,
Steve,
when
you know, I don't think this is what the Commonwealth is talking about. This is what the British press and the BBC and the left-wing newspapers
I hope so.
about. I really don't think they're actually spending very much time talking about
I don't know.
this
We
in
had
Samoa.
the Bahamian foreign minister on BBC Radio 4 saying that, you know, David Lammy, he's said that, you know, reparations should be on the table and all this, and that he's expecting Labour to U-turn and all of this. So they're really going for it.
Yeah,
They're really going for it.
I think it's all being stirred up a little bit by the press. They've got better things to talk about, and I think the Commonwealth does have some importance. And I think it's remarkable. We have all these countries, and we have a forum in which we can talk in a friendly fashion. That in itself is a huge...
And if we can do that, that's fine, but not if we're constantly talking about what we should be apologising for.
Well, that is true.
Now, now we're running out of time, so I do want to just briefly mention fish and chips, because it is a Friday, and found out today that the average fish and chips now is £11.13. That's for haddock and chips, and the average for a cod and chips will set you back £10.92. Now, Daniel, back in the day, you know, before I was born, of course, Daniel, how much would a cod and chips have set you back?
Do you know, I don't know, but my mother used to go when we were children, small children, she would go every Friday to the fish and chip shop and queue up, because there was always a big queue round the shop to get fish and chips for us, because we loved it so much. Now, that was pre-decimal. What she was actually paying in pre-decimal terms, I mean, it would have been, even if I told you that it was 3 and 4 pence, you wouldn't know what that meant. But it was definitely well under £1 that you could feed a family for. Well, I think fish and chips is absolutely delicious. I know the best.
We've got 20 seconds left. Steve,
London.
tell me something about fish and chips.
Well, it used to be the family treat when I was a kid, but then you could get it for 6 pence for a bag. Old sixpence. 6 pence? An old sixpence for a bag of chips.
Well, thank you very much to Lord Daniel Moylan and, of course, Steve McCabe. This has been Dewbs & Co. It is you're coming up, and that is all from me. So thank you very much indeed, and have a great weekend.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening. Thanks for joining me for your latest weather update from the Met Office. Here on GB News, 3 areas of weather tomorrow. A fine day for many, but there will be some wet weather in the far northwest and quite grey and a little damp in the far southeast. The bigger picture shows an area of low pressure down to the southwest. That is just edging away. This weather front is moving north, bringing some damp conditions through this evening across central and southern Scotland, clearing away from northeast England. At the same time, overnight, some patchy rain just trickling up from France towards Kent and maybe even into the London area. But most places dry and clear through the nights. Temperatures could dip down to single figures, but generally pretty mild for the end of October. Into tomorrow, and as I said, for many of us, it's a fine day, but there will be a weather front bringing cloud and rain into the Outer Hebrides and across the Northern Isles, and that will only slowly track its way southwards across parts of the mainland down towards the Highlands. But for much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, it's a dry start to the weekend. Could be some fog around, and further south, maybe a little misty in places. Certainly a grey start for East Anglia and the southeast. A little bit of rain and drizzle likely here. Staying quite damp, actually, across parts of the southeast for most of the day. Quite windy in the far southwest, but not as windy as today. But for the Isles of Scilly and Cornwall, still a noticeable breeze. Could be the odd shower, but much of southwest England, Wales, northern England, eastern Scotland, dry and fine. That weather front will bring cloud and rain to the west coast